Welcome to the Bioethics Babe podcast, where we examine the tough questions in human flourishing in light of science, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Darina Grosso-Agnew. Now let's dive in. What if the most painful suffering in your life can't be solved with technology? Infertility is often treated as a medical problem waiting for a technological solution. In the age of IVF, embryo selection, and a rapidly expanding fertility industry, many couples hear the same message. If you want a child badly enough, science can make it happen. But what if the story of infertility is deeper than that? What if it's not only a medical condition, but a profound existential and relational trial? And what if a life without biological children can still be deeply meaningful and fruitful? My guest today is Leigh Snead, author of Infertile but Fruitful, fellow with the Catholic Association, and co-host of the nationally syndicated show Conversations with Consequences. In this episode, we explore infertility, the cultural pressure to solve suffering with technology, and the surprising ways couples can bear fruit in the face of infertility. Leigh, welcome to Bioethics Babe.
Oh, thanks, Arena. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you so much, and here's the book, Infertile but Fruitful, Finding Fulfillment When You Can't Conceive. And it was just published, right?
Yeah, end of January.
Wonderful, wonderful. So for listeners who may not know your story, can you share your infertility journey?
Sure. My husband, Carter, and I were married right after I graduated from college. He was 2 years ahead and had started law school. We sort of gave in to, that typical secular pressure of don't have kids right away. So we used NFP to postpone pregnancy. And when we were ready, a couple years later, it just didn't happen. Month after month went by. It was one of those things where we kind of looked back and we're like, we weren't really, really careful with the NFP. So, it should have maybe been in the back of our minds, but, we were still really young in our mid-20s. And so we tried for a year, and we knew that after a year, a young person under 35 should be able to get pregnant. If not, that's the time to see a doctor. So we did know about Dr. Hilgers in Nebraska, and we knew there are some other practices like that. But I think we just figured we didn't have any obvious signs that it wasn't happening except the lack of pregnancy and a baby. So we decided we thought we could go to just a mainstream doctor, fertility and, reproductive endocrinologist. And we just felt like it was going to be an easy fix. There's just like one little thing like, oh, this is all you need, or this is this. So we thought, okay, great. We walked in with our Catholic infertility playbook thinking, we could just use his expertise to solve our problems while, only doing illicit things. And he was not into that. I mean, he sort of pacified us for a while and like kind of threw some Clomid at me and a couple other things. But he was always kind of mocking us for the way we, did some diagnostics. And always at the end of every meeting, I really want you in the IVF program. He wanted to enroll me. He offered me this money back guarantee. He just was, I was 27, so I was probably going to be a pretty good customer. And he just didn't get it. And eventually, when we said it again, no, this isn't what we're going to do. He just pointed back at his labs and was like, I'm creating life back there, not destroying it. And we're like, okay. And my husband just grabbed my hand and we walked out, and we didn't even check out at the desk. We just left and we never went back. So then we decided, okay, now's the time. We're going to go ahead and we're going to learn an entirely new fertility tracking model and figure it out. And we're going to go to Nebraska because there weren't NaPro doctors on every corner like there are now. Like we have a whole practice here where I live in South Bend. And I know in DC, it's easier to find doctors there, and Dr. Bukowski's there, and other restorative reproductive medicine doctors. So we were about to do that, but then we just knew there wasn't a big discernment for us for adoption. We had always been kind of open to it, and actually even kind of excited by the idea, even when we were, actively trying to conceive. And so we talked to some friends about it, some older friends who had adopted, and they all said the same thing, which was get your paperwork started because it takes forever. FBI, background checks, safety checks of your home. You have to have like an escape ladder if you live in an apartment, like all these things. And so we thought, okay, we'll do that. Talk to a social worker, check out some agencies. And we decided just to go ahead and sign up with an agency, thinking this could take a year and we don't know what the, you know, fertility stuff is going to happen. So, and we just wanted to be parents. We just wanted to be parents. Well, it turned out it was only 6 weeks between the day that we like put down our deposit with the agency and our first son, Orlando, was born, who just turned 21. And at the same time, my husband had just been offered a job at Notre Dame. And so we moved and had a little baby. And so we need to get settled in. But then you know how it is. You have a baby, it's like, it's kind of like, it's like a ticket to like a whole group of friends, right? You meet other women who have babies the same age as yours. So we played play dates every week, blah, blah. And Orlando, as he grew older, 2, 3, he started to notice that all the other buddies in the group were having little, you know, brothers and sisters. And he was kind of like, Mom, when's it going to be our turn? When do we get to have one? So we said, okay, finally, I'm really going to learn the Creighton model method. We're gonna do this. So we did. I had to take like my instructor. I had to do it on the phone, like not even Zoom. This is how old I am. Did it on the phone at night after he was in bed. Take tests. I think I had to fax the tests, which meant that Carter probably had to do it at work. Anyway, so finally we got that, and then you do a bunch of blood work, and for a couple months, and then there's usually a wait list to see Dr. Hilders. But I finally got off, and so I went to Nebraska, had the laparoscopy. I had a little bit of endometriosis, nothing that was screamed like, oh, this is obviously why you're not getting pregnant. So you just kind of, when he's in there, he kind of cleans up. You watch a video of your insides, which like affirmed for me my choice not to ever go into medicine. Um, and, but it's really, I mean, the care you get from him is just the polar opposite of what we got from that mainstream doctor. Warm, treating you like a person, like God's creation, and giving you like all the respect and that you deserve. And also just that sort of underlying principle that they have that a healthy woman should be able to get pregnant. So let's find out let's figure out your disease, your pathology. Let's make you healthy, and hopefully a pregnancy results from that. So he was really optimistic with us. He gave us a 75% chance, which obviously it's nuts, but I think just I don't know how you would actually like work that out mathematically, but he was very optimistic. And so we had a regime of drugs, and I think this is an important part of this story. I think when people think about natural family planning, restorative reproductive medicine, NaPro, as an alternative to ARTs and IVF in particular, it's easy to sort of think it's like praying the rosary and drinking green tea and skipping through lavender fields to a grotto or something. It's a lot of needles, and it's a lot of drugs, and it's a lot of blood draws and a lot of tests and injections and surgeries, and it could be a couple different surgeries. So it's still medicine, and it's still a treatment, and it's still trying to get your body to do what left on its own it's not doing. So we did that for a while. No dice, no baby. And we decided to take a break because Carter was going to teach in the Notre Dame London program. So we took another break, 6 months. It was so good. We were ready to come back home. I was 30, I was about to turn 35 at this point. And I said, okay, I think Orlando and I had to go home first because my husband had some more work to do in Europe. So we went home, and I said, I'm going to call Dr. Hilders and get started again. And he said, I don't know, why don't we just adopt again? We'll still try, we'll still hope and pray that we conceive, but this has been really nice not having to deal with all this medicine and things and it was just like, yes. And I think that was one of those things where I hate the word permission here because it's not like I was asking for it, but I think, you feel like you owe this to each other. He wanted to support me, whatever I wanted to do. I didn't want to quit because the injections were annoying, but it was like somehow realizing that we both felt that way, that it just wasn't good for us. Luckily, our marriage, I think actually we were very lucky in that the whole infertility thing really made us stronger, improved our marriage. But it just was exhausting. And we knew that adoption just wasn't a big leap for us to make. It just was like, yes. So we came home and we started the process again. And as soon as all of our background checks, et cetera, were all done, we got a call from the agency saying, okay, we got your last things. You're all ready to go. You're going to go live every month. We'll report back to you how your profile is doing, if anyone's looked. And they said, "But there's a woman who's expecting twins at the end of this month. We think she might like you. Do you mind if we show her your profile?" And we're thinking, no, that's great. If they think somebody would be interested in us, that's great, because that's a good sign that we'll definitely get a baby this year. But it turned out that she went to talk to us the next day. And then the next day, the babies were born. And we were there. We went to take her out to lunch. And instead, she had babies. And that was it. That was about 48 hours notice when the twins happened. And then we kept trying and, always hoping, not as sort of actively as I got into my 40s, obviously, but, you'd think like, oh, it's this time of the month, ovulation, we should try to, make time for each other, just to see, which, I mean, was really ridiculous, given I had never been pregnant and I was in my mid 40s. But, you think you never know. And then that's actually when I felt ready to write this book, because I started to think like, I could really think it in my head, like, I'm not going to be one of those stories. I'm not going to be in the Daily Mail. Like, this is no miracle late 40s pregnancy for me. I'm never going to get pregnant. And once I could really say that, then I started writing about it. And then someone had encouraged me to write a book. And that's when I felt I was ready to tell my story. And then
Beautiful.
also in my late 40s, 47, I think we adopted one more baby.
How did infertility affect your sense of identity as a woman and as a wife?
Well, I definitely had feelings of being less than and not very feminine, because so much of, I mean, we're built to be mothers. That's how we're designed. We have all the urges. We've got, the softer body to hold the babies. We've got this just like hollow in our pelvis to, welcome and nurture new life. And I just felt like there must be something wrong with me. And it really did make me question sort of that inner femininity. And for my husband, I mean, I think I was just worried that he would be disappointed and like worried he thought he married the wrong girl, or just thinking things like if he had married someone else, he could have these biological children. And I actually invented this. Apparently, though, I'm not the only one. So maybe I actually stole this idea from somebody else and made her my own. But her name's Fertile Myrtle, and she's a really devout Catholic supermodel. And she's like perfect in every way, and she's really fertile. And I was pretty sure my husband was going to leave me for her. I mean, like, that's like when I was like feeling super crazy, probably as a result of some of the hormones I was on. But yeah, Fertile Myrtle, I got to keep her away. So I think that's part of it. I think it's just you kind of feel like, I mean, we were young and a lot of our friends were still unmarried. But once everybody was married and starting having 1, 2, 3 kids, you just feel left behind. And like somehow you're not quite, I imagine it's how it can feel when your friends are all married and you really have a vocation to be a wife and mother and you're not married yet. And you feel somehow you just like missed like sign up day or something. Like, it's people are moving forward without you. And so it can feel like that too. It can feel almost like you're still, I don't know if it's like a lack of maturity, because it's not quite that, but it definitely eats at what you sort of imagined your life as a wife and hopefully mother would be.
Mhm. And infertility is often treated as a medical condition, but many couples experience it as a deep existential and relational trial, as I mentioned. How did that trial manifest in your life?
I definitely had those sort of like why me moments or why not me moments. But I have to say, my husband and I, maybe it's because we both came from divorced homes. I'm an only child. He has one sister. I think that, and I think having divorced parents, and even if they have some involvement in your life, it's still just not quite the same. And I think for some if especially if it's one of those kind of happy divorces and parents get along and stuff, you don't necessarily, when you're a child, feel those effects, but you get older and you think, huh, like, there are those things. And it was a real leap for me to be able to picture myself married and with kids. I could kind of do one or the other, but both together were tough. And so I'd finally sort of got there, and I had this great husband and I loved him and he's my best friend. And we wanted to do this together and almost kind of like rewrite our family story. And it just wasn't happening. And again, even though we were really open to adoption, we didn't have any adoptions like in our families. it was really a foreign kind of concept, and so even knowing what that would look like, I mean, honestly, like, I couldn't even find what it would look like in a good movie or a show at that point because it was a long time ago. There's a lot better content now. But so I think that was it. I mean, I think it just was sort of like we had this plan. I was going to be pregnant during my 3rd year of coursework for my PhD, and I would give birth after I turned in like my last paper, and then I would sit around nursing my baby and pretend to write a dissertation. Like that was the plan. Um, and it just didn't work. And when it's not working and you have to wait a whole month to try again, months add up quickly to years. And then all of a sudden you're just not where you thought you would be. So I mean, that was, I think, the biggest part of it. Just like you're not in charge.
Mhm.
And it's one thing, again, like writing it, like sort of like with the hindsight, clarity of hindsight is different from how you feel when you're in that. Um, and memories change. It's hard. It's just like writing the book and then talking about it so often. I wonder now too, I'm like, how much of the memories changed, because now, you think about it different ways. You think about stuff. I think about stuff I didn't put in the book that I did only just remembered in the last, since the book's come out. But yeah, I think that's the biggest part.
Mhm. Was there a particular turning point when you began to see infertility not only as a loss, but as something that could still be meaningful?
Yeah, I think that was only really just in the last maybe 10 years because wasn't dwelling so much on it but I would still be sad sometimes, especially when I think of like families who have children close together and like now they're having like like we have friends who are older than us and they have 5 children. One's adopted actually. And their 2 daughters have each now had like 4 and 5 kids each. And so their like mantle at their house for Christmas, it's like I'm afraid it's gonna like come out of the wall with all the stockings hung up there, and you think like, so those kind of things still kind of get to you that, those people who are just sort of like, we're open to another baby, and then they're pregnant and then they have a baby. And that would more babies means more grandchildren eventually. And not ever having that sort of like ease to grow the family, I think, is probably one of the sadder parts of that because I never knew I wanted a big family. And then you think, oh, is it because I couldn't have as many kids as I wanted that I feel this way now? But I mean, geez, I just wish I had double or triple, I just,
Mhm.
so that is a little bit sad, especially now that I'm 50 and I mean, not that it hasn't been over for a long time, but like it's really, really over. Um, and even adopting at 50 is pretty rare. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's the sad part now.
Mhm. As you mentioned, your own story eventually included adoption, and now you're a mother to 4 sons. But you also emphasize that adoption isn't the required quote unquote path for infertile couples. And even though we're going to talk a little bit more at length about adoption later in the show, can you just give us a little sneak peek? How did you and your husband discern that adoption was your vocation? And what do you have to say about it? That it shouldn't be the quote unquote required path for everybody who has infertility issues.
Yeah, and it's funny because I do really try hard in like my work and the way I talk about it to not conflate the two and to separate them. But because adoption and trying to conceive were simultaneous for us, I can't not talk about it. So I mean, like Orlando was I remember like having to give myself an injection like in the kitchen one night and I was just it's just one of those things where you just some days you just hesitate, before you plunge it. And he was just like, you can do it, mommy, you can do it. And so like, just the idea like he was at the hospital with me when I was recovering from my laparoscopy. And so for me, I try not to talk about it, but I end up talking about it a lot. So anyway, here it is. For us, again, like I said, it wasn't a hard choice to make for us. It didn't feel like a loss, but at the same time, it's definitely not a cure for infertility. It's almost like I mourn the thing that the sort of the accessories of fertility. I mean, I know it's not easy, and I certainly am not downplaying pregnancy or birthing or any of those things, but the idea that your body just sort of betrays you. That's sort of more where I feel, that loss. Adoption. So anyway, like you've been saying eloquently, infertility is a medical diagnosis, and adoption is a vocation. I don't think my husband and I saw it quite that way. At first, I think we just wanted to be parents, and we loved being parents to our little boy. But I think as it grew, like as we did it again, and just we saw just like the whole big messy thing. It involves a lot of people, adoption. Like it's a lot of people and a lot of things. And, I think it means a lot of different things to different people, which is one of the reasons I don't talk about it because I really only know my adoption stories. Um, but I definitely heard a voice in my ear say like, you're an adoptive family. Like this is what you're made for. And it just feels right. I mean, which we joke about it. We probably shouldn't joke about it, but honestly, you could like hear a knock on the door and like we open the door and there's like a little sibling group outside. Like, all right, come on in, join the fun. We just would never even flinch at that kind of thing. And it's strange that two people that both have that feeling about it found each other in this crazy world. Again, and a friend, actually, it's a common friend of both of ours, Elizabeth Kirk, pointed out to me once, and it really struck me that, you know, you and your husband are not biologically related, and that's your family, and you found each other. And I just feel like that's amazing. I have 6 people under this roof who, well, I mean, the twins are related, obviously, but, there wa that wasn't the plan for them, but it was the plan for us to all be a family, and it's just a relief. But at the same time, a lot of people are not called to do that, and they're called to be fruitful in other ways, and I think that oftentimes people will suggest adoption and the infertile couple already knows about adoption. They're not waiting for you to say something about it before they find an agency. But I think a lot of times that's because you want people to feel better, and maybe you love your own children so much, and that, I mean, the whole issue of infertility is because they did want children. And so you're trying to fix them, and then it's sort of like, if they would just adopt a baby, then you'd kinda know what to do with them, like, okay, then, you can go in the family with kids pile. But I think we overlook that idea that you're already a family. That day you say, "I do," you're a family and you're enough, and you don't even have to do reproductive restorative medicine. You're not even obliged to do that. You're just obliged to welcome children if and when they come. And because some people just don't want all that medicine. And, I think psychologically it can be so damaging month after month, especially if you're putting a lot of money into it, a lot of time, and it's making you feel physically bad. I think that, yeah. So anyway, I think that, I think we just have to remember little things like priests are called to be fruitful, that babies, we shouldn't reduce fruitfulness to just babies.
I think that's really well said, and I really love what you said about, letting yourself mourn the loss of that infertility, not just trying to quote unquote patch it up, right? And that again, adoption is a vocation separate and apart from any infertility issues as you and your husband discerned, and that you're already a family. So that you
Yeah.
and your husband are a family, that
Right.
even if children never come.
And it's hard because I think we use that language like, oh, when are they going to start a family? And we start to believe that themselves. It's like, you already are family. And I think that kind of language probably leads to the high rate of separation and divorce that come from experiencing infertility. I mean, you add the stress and you think, again, like you're waiting for that next step. It's like permanently, it's almost like you've moved back a step, like you're permanently engaged and never getting married. Like it's not like, so you're just waiting, 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 and that day never comes. And so you're kind of like an illegitimate family or something.
Mhm. I love that message that you are enough, and
Hmm.
as you are enough.
Yep.
So let's pivot now to how the cultural narrative around infertility. You already mentioned how that endocrinologist you went to was just really trying to push IVF on you and your
Uh-huh.
husband. Could you talk a little bit more about how culture often frames infertility as a problem that just needs to be solved technologically?
Yeah, I think that people, even, religious people can think, well, God has given us this technology, like he gave us, antibiotics and whatever else, we should use these technologies to do this. And, it's important to have children. I think that the idea that I think it's easy to fall prey too to the promise or the idea that IVF like is definitely going to work because you think especially like the embryo has been created. There's already this little baby and that seems to be a really hard part for a lot of people like me when, you never actually you don't know, but probably not. Sperm is not meeting egg. And so you think like doctors kind of smash them together and make it work.
Mhm.
Then of course all you have to do then is like create your little cozy womb and, through hormones and all these other things. And it's definitely going to work. And so I think that's that pressure because why would you not do something that's definitely going to work? So I think that dishonesty in the culture and I'm part of the big business of IVF is a real problem. And I think that contributes, yeah, to that pressure that people feel that even if they're not comfortable with it, they're like, this is stupid. Why am I not doing this?
Right.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, it could be that people pin their hopes on this and then it doesn't work. And then you have
Mhm.
embryos that died in the process
Yeah.
and the loss of that, obviously as we know about IVF and the process of IVF. Why do you think our culture struggles to sit with infertility as a form of suffering rather than something to eliminate at any cost?
Well, I think we have to look back at early modern philosophy when the name of the game was just relief of human suffering. And there sort of ceased being like the idea of like a teleological understanding of human beings. But that's a little heavy. I mean, I do like to blame a lot of things on Descartes. Um, but I think, yeah, again, the advance in medicine, I think that people really put all their eggs in like a medical basket. I think we rely on that. We think it can help us with almost anything. And the idea that I don't know, yeah, I don't think a lot of people don't understand. I think I was starting this thought, but then I distracted myself earlier. But I think that people don't understand that suffering is part of being human. It's what it is. Like suffering is part and parcel of this life that we live. And people don't like that. People want to fix that. People want no fault divorce. People want, all these like things that just fix things and then you just get on with it. Rather than to sit with that suffering, I think it's just people don't understand that that's part of the human condition. And that's, I mean, I don't know how you fix that, but your
Right.
podcast, maybe.
And things like no fault divorce don't actually fix things, they make things
Exactly.
worse. Do you think modern reproductive technologies have changed how society understands children and parenthood?
Oh, yeah. I mean, do you remember those articles that there's probably still more, but there seemed to be a lot of them at one time, maybe a year ago, for that company Orchid?
Mhm.
It's targeted not even at infertile people. It's just people who want their like the designer baby. And it's really true. I mean, that you can just screen for anything. And it's a private company and they'll do it for a big price tag. But I mean, it's I mean, it's sort of bad enough the commodification of children that happens even with just like regular IVF, but to like have this idea that you're going to just skip right over the idea that you could just make a baby at home because you don't want the risk of what combo of genes, you're going to get. That you have to go to this place, and I mean, it's called Orchid, like, the packaging is so glossy. I mean, it's like the evil version of, like, your studio setup, like, your studio set is so attractive, and I love, like, the neon and the pink and the flowers, and they have all that too, but it's to sell you this, like, horrible, horrible thing, and the fact that people don't see the eugenics behind that is crazy, but that's when it comes in pretty packaging, it's easy to be like, "Oh," and they some of the lines about don't you want to give your child the chance? And it's like, no, it's that child. Like the other children did not get a chance. There are plenty of children you're not giving a chance to. It's not making one child. It's not like that sort of amazing, like in utero surgery they do. That's not what's happening here. This is screening and chucking the bad ones. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's part of it. And it changes definitely. Like apparently in Silicon Valley, there's a real um pattern is not the right word, but there a lot of people are ending up, and especially men are ending up in therapy, these tech bros who like custom ordered their IVF babies and they're not turning out. Like they're not getting what they ordered and they're real disappointed. and they don't feel connected to their children. I mean, it'd be one thing, I feel like, if that was just like a story you heard, like an urban myth or something, but like the fact that there were like articles about it with quotes from real people in like a mainstream publication, I was like, whoa, this is awful. I mean, you can definitely imagine that happening, but to like have this proof that it is happening is horrifying.
Yes, and we actually did a couple of episodes on IVF, and the most recent one is on designer babies. And so everything you've been saying is exactly, Nucleus IVF is another company, Orchid, where they say things like, quote unquote, build your best baby. And then, as you're saying, if people start treating their children as products to be created, then when that child doesn't turn out the way that you expect, do you have buyer's remorse? And
I know
you're
you're not
saying
allowed to return it.
right,
It's final
exactly.
sale.
Exactly, because we're talking about people here,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
People should never be treated that way. They should never be treated like products, and especially in that relationship between a mom and a dad and a child. It's
Yeah.
it's wild. It's wild how
Yeah.
it's changing the landscape. So you already talked about your experience and the pressure that this endocrinologist put on you to consider IVF. What helped you and your husband decide that that's not the direction you wanted to go?
Well, I think, it's hard to, separate different things for different causes. But at the time, we were practicing Catholics. That's one thing. We knew what the church taught. Also, my husband was the general counsel for the President's Council on Bioethics, led by Leon Cass in George W. Bush administration. And they were tackling with a lot of these things. There was the stem cell research debate and things like that. He was the chief drafter of a government report called Reproduction and Responsibility. And so he saw sort of firsthand, like that Wild West and this was, 20 years ago, and it was already a mess. No regulations. They don't want any regulations. They want to self regulate and self report, which is terrible, obviously, when you're dealing with like human life. So he knew about that stuff. And subsequently, like as he was working on it, that was the first year we were trying to get pregnant. And so all the time he was learning about a new thing that might be wrong with us. And then at the same time, in my philosophy program at Catholic University, I was taking a lot of medical ethics courses. And so I knew sort of the ins and outs and everything that happened. So again, because I think these days IVF is a lot more newsworthy and you see it more. But again, 20 years ago, you kind of had to go looking for that information and realizing exactly what goes into it. And because even today, people still don't know or don't want to know exactly what happens.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what are some of the ethical and emotional questions couples rarely hear discussed before pursuing IVF?
I think what are you going to do if you get pregnant the first time and you have 8 more frozen embryos? What are you going to do? What would you think about, offering them for embryo adoption? Are you going to just destroy these embryos? What traits would you like to screen for? What does that mean? We can't guarantee that trait. I think, are you going to be comfortable with the idea that we've taken sex out of reproduction completely? We've divorced the unitive and the procreative. How's that going to feel? How's that going to feel immediately? And how's it going to feel down the road? You're essentially inviting like several more people into the bedroom to help like this process. What's that going to be like? I think like the really tough, just clinical laying it out of exactly what happens, what could happen, what you have control over, what you don't have control over. And, you know, just asking yourself, is that worth it? Is all of those things worth it? And I think for, some people, obviously it is, but I think that question of what are you going to do with the leftover embryos is a question that's not being asked because obviously that's why we have, what is it, over 1 million in cryo storage?
Mhm.
No one is asking these people, or
Right.
making, or even like saying like, you have to tell us what you're going to do or
Mhm.
offering them to not make so many embryos, even that would be a step. Anyway.
Right. Do you think couples are given the full picture of the moral, relational, and psychological implications of assisted reproductive technologies?
Definitely not by a conventional reproductive endocrinologist because for them it's all good news. There's no ethical qualms about any of that. I don't know what marriage prep looks like these days in terms of that kind of stuff? You could answer that. You've been married more recently than I have been. I don't know if that's covered now. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think you'd have to go looking for it. I think you and I both live in a world where all of our friends and colleagues devour that kind of information, either from mainstream media or from Catholic outlets. And I don't think everybody is like that. So I don't know. I don't know how much people understand really people like who aren't in, these fields who write about like pro-life stuff and other bioethical issues. I really I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean to say actually that's a really good point. In our marriage prep, they do talk about NFP, etc., but they don't talk about assisted reproductive technologies. And who knows how many of those couples might have infertility issues, and then they never hear this, right?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And I think in seminaries, it's sometimes just kind of glossed over. I don't think a lot of priests have it. I think definitely older priests have never heard of it except maybe they've heard now, like, oh, there's this new thing they can do with the doctors to help people who aren't getting pregnant get pregnant. And then they stop there. And I think a lot of probably older people, especially people who are not, planning on having a baby, like priest or an old person or something, why would you sort of get into the nitty gritty unless that was a particular interest of yours or, there was some, impetus to make you look for that information. So that's interesting to hear that it's not addressed at all in your pre-Cana.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's another campaign we can start, right?
That's
How to
right.
fix
That's
the
right.
world.
What would you want physicians or fertility clinics to communicate more honestly to patients?
Oh, I think all the things that we've talked about. I think one of the things, and I see this a lot, um, like I'm just sort of figuring out Substack. Sometimes I can't find the article I start. Makes me feel really old. But it does seem to me that people are not being honest about age and fertility. That people are saying again, like that whole promise that egg freezing, embryo freezing, this is a guarantee. It's that this is definitely going to work for later. So you've got time, no problem. And Janet Jackson at 50 having a baby, and I think they don't say like, well, I don't think they always point out like, well, that was obviously donor eggs. So then, now you're inviting more people to the party. Um, I think that, yeah, the idea that you can put off pregnancy as long as you want and number one, and count on conceiving naturally. I mean, that's also a bad idea. And I mean, you do what you got to do, but that the fact that, there, female bodies haven't changed that much. Um, and it's not like just because it's more modern times that our bodies said, okay, great. Now, we'll keep the eggs going until later. I think people want to believe that they've got that kind of time on their hands. And whereas I think, especially if you see a good Catholic doctor, um, that they should really bring that up with you. I mean, even if it's just like, I need you to realize that this might not happen for you, or you might have to do this, or do you want to do some baseline testing now to see where you are? Things like that.
Right. And I think that so we will definitely do a show on egg freezing and some of the other topics, but it's definitely the fertility industry overselling something that they can't guarantee.
Yeah.
And it's sad that couples will, or even just single women will literally bank their eggs thinking, well, 10, 20 years, oh, those eggs are still there and I'll be able
Yeah.
to conceive. And then what happens if she doesn't?
Yeah. I know. And I know, just gone. And I mean, the company, doesn't Apple cover it? Like,
It's crazy.
yeah. I mean, if your boss is doing it for you for free, you're like, oh, I should just do that. And then you think, even if maybe you weren't going to do it, you wouldn't have looked into it yourself. You have this incentive to do it. And then you already have that backup plan. So then you just put it off. It's a very strange thing. And it's such a strange promise to make somebody when obviously somebody making those promises knows the truth.
Mhm. And really, I mean, think about it, when companies offer that incentive, it just means that those women can work longer for their companies
Oh, yeah.
and push off their fertility. That's
Hmm.
really what's behind it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
maybe they're really, really evil thinking like, we'll trick them into thinking this will work later, and then it won't work. So they'll put it off and then it won't work. And then they can still work for me,
Mm,
because they
mhm.
won't have any children.
Yeah. Why do you
Anyway.
think modern culture has become so uncomfortable with suffering and seemingly turns to technology to resolve it?
That's a big one, Arena. I mean, I think it started Descartes and Bacon set those wheels in motion. I think that we had this radical autonomy that just, I think, really seeks out those kind of technological, like, relief, for anything that's going on. I mean, I think people have blurred the lines between therapy and enhancement. Um, People, take drugs to, think faster, think better. Um, and again, I think that can be, obviously, there are people with a diagnosis who need those medicines, but people take them for other reasons. I mean, we're just very, very consumer focused. And I think if you can just buy a solution, why would you suffer? I think it's too much of a long term game, how suffering, pays off. And especially if you've taken Jesus out of the analogy, obviously, or not the analogy, but the situation, like there's no point, right? And there's no point to any of that, to anything, if God doesn't exist. So I think that for a lot of people, that's true. Or they think in their minds, even if they do think about something bigger, about like what a human being is, what's our relationship to the divine, all those different things, they separate that from things that can be easily taken care of by a pill or a medical procedure.
Hmm. Well, let's turn now to fruitfulness and redefining what that means. So, the title of your book is Infertile but Fruitful. What does fruitfulness mean outside of biological parenthood?
I think it can mean so much, whether you're a single person or a married person. Um, and I think we need to look at things like we talked about earlier, like priests are called to be fruitful, single people are called to be fruitful. You're not, you haven't fulfilled your fruitfulness obligation like after you hit menopause, like if you've had a bunch of kids and then you're like, okay, but I did that. Now that's done. Now I'm not going to be fruitful anymore. And so I think that it's using the gifts that God has given you to, better other people. I think that prayer is such a wonderful fruit that our lives can bear. I think praying for other people, especially offering up your suffering for other people, using that, especially for women, using your innate motherhood to do things. And it doesn't mean, necessarily I mean, it can mean being good godmother, a great aunt, supportive, but there are other particularly feminine, features I think that we have that we can give the world the way, just it's a special feminine way of caring for other people that, I think whether that's hospitality, whether that's, just it's friendship. I mean, I think mothering, again, I think mothering has been sort of reduced to just that parent child relationship. And while that's certainly the model and Our Lady is our biggest model, that I think that the mothering, though, is something that comes very naturally to us. And we're meant to do it. And I think that feeling fruitless is, this is sort of harsh, but it can feel, overlooking what you can do for people, I think can be a little bit self, uh, just not destructive. Sorry, I can't find the word. Anyway, I think you're doing yourself and anything else like a disfavor by thinking that you don't have any other fruits, that you're sort of, you're unable to be fruitful because you're not getting pregnant. Because almost anything you do that's like given in like joy and generosity and charity is fruitful. And that can be almost anything.
Hmm. Beautifully said. At what point did you begin to realize that fruitfulness could take forms you hadn't expected?
Um, I think, well, it's hard again because we're adoptive parents too. I think that I could just sort of considered that to be that. But really writing this book, and getting to know and understand what being married and infertile without a call to adoption, like what that looks like and what that means, I really have a different appreciation for that sort of fruitfulness. Yeah. So in writing this book, I realized how fruitful, you know, life has turned out for us that doesn't have anything to do with our children. I look especially at my husband, who you know too from your time at Notre Dame, about what he does for his students and the influence that he has there, and whether that's like a direct mentoring or, you know, when he was the director of the Center for Ethics and Culture, doing like programming, formation programming. Another thing he does is he likes people who are involved in his Soren Fellows program or his previous Soren Fellows program to get married. And I think he prays for that all the time. He has, he has a list of people on his phone that he prays for all the time. So I think just in my husband's life, I've seen the ways that, again, he's a wonderful father and husband, but his fruitfulness like overflows, like it's everywhere. And it's through his work and his friendships and his relationships with the students, especially. In fact, this is a good time to tell this story. There was a young man married. They weren't getting pregnant. It was up at night, late, 3 o'clock in the morning or something, just looking on the internet, trying to find just some solace, just something out there. And his wife was really sad, and he found this article, and it was one of the ones that I wrote on infertility. And they looked at the last name and saw that it was Snead, and then realized that I was probably Carter's wife, and that he had been one of Carter's students. And so he reached
Mhm.
out to Carter, and then they've had like this beautiful like friendship grow from that sort of shared suffering. And anyway, that was one of my favorite things that sort of came out of all of this.
Mm. Beautiful. And how did your understanding of vocation change through this experience?
Again, I think we adopted pretty early. We were in our 20s still, and so that it didn't feel like that at the time. I just wanted to be a mom. But as it grew, and again, you meet other people, you realize different perspectives about it. That I think little things like I've seen women, we probably both know them, that have, really kept up with whether it's NaPro or other reproductive restorative medicine things. They've just kept trying and trying and trying to get pregnant. And like after 7, 8 years, they succeed. And I think, and again, I think because I was called to adoptive motherhood, I couldn't have done that. I know me, I just was ready to be done with the needles and this, because, you could keep it up. And again, the numbers are very good for NaPro and restorative reproductive medicine, but that doesn't always work either.
Mhm.
And so I think that way I think it was easy for me to stop doing it because my vocation lied somewhere else. And again, that took, moving past those moments and looking back at my life. And again, just realizing that this is a very particular thing to be open to. And it is strange because it's coupled with infertility, because again, had we conceived easily, we probably wouldn't have pursued adoption, which is crazy to think, because this is what I'm made for. Like, these boys are mine and, meant to be ours, and this is what I'm meant to do. But again, I just I don't know. It's so clear to me. And I think once you sort of open yourself up to hearing things like that, then you realize that that's what you're called to do.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, for me, it was retroactive, I think, but um, still the same.
That's amazing. And to your point earlier, spiritual motherhood can have so many forms. We had Kimberly Cook on to talk about that, and
Yeah.
she has biological children, but she also talks about that every woman is called to spiritual motherhood, whether or not she has biological
Right.
children. And so I think that that's really important to note, that this fruitfulness
Really
has
important.
a dimension, and that our feminine genius, as I would call it,
Mhm.
is part of that as women. And of course, there's the masculine genius too, as and you were talking about Carter and all the things that he's done and how he's been fruitful. What kinds of relationships or forms of service became sources of fruitfulness in your life?
I think, I mean, I have to say, I have had a couple babysitters over the years that have become like really, really, really dear friends, especially as they've grown up and started families of their own. And um, I think that letting people into your home and seeing like literally your dirty laundry is something that it took me a while to sort of like be okay with, to admit like I really need this help. I need you to, organize my linen cabinet while I just like sleep on this pile of laundry on my bed. Like I just need some help. So that vulnerability really let people in. So I almost, even though they were obviously, doing this work for pay, they became like members of our family. And I felt like sometimes I could be a mother to them, especially like when their own mother was, home in a different state or something. So I think that, and again, I wouldn't have met these women if I wouldn't have like gone out searching for mentees or something. Some people have that in them. I'm not, but having those young women who are now just normal women, I guess, in their lives. I mean, that relationships have been so special for me, and especially because I'm an only child, I really, really am envious of people who have those intimate relationships with sisters and things. And so I having, people like literally thrust upon like you in your sort of most vulnerable moments, like sort of like just, you know, mashes you into that vulnerability and that intimacy um of, female relationships. And so that in particular has been a very special experience that I realized like, well, is going to sort of wind down eventually. But I mean, still right now I have this really terrific babysitter that I like so much. And I'm just so excited about what she's going to do with her life. Yes, I think that's probably the thing that sticks out the most to me.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn now to the spiritual dimension of all of this. How did your faith shape the way you processed infertility?
Again, I think so much of that has come after the fact. Because we were really pretty blindsided by the infertility. But again, we just kind of have the personalities where we just kind of get on with it and just acknowledging that, everyone has a cross, but that what really can change things is when you like readily, like you accept it, you choose to carry it and you get on with it and you make it, not sort of an external focus, but just that it's part of your life. And that, I mean, one practical is probably not the right word, but for us, I often, whenever I was feeling particularly sad, but not so sad that I wasn't mindful of like the spiritual dimension of suffering, I would often offer up my own suffering with infertility for people who had a call to marriage and weren't finding a husband. And for me, that was sort of an immediate sense of like, this isn't for nothing. This is something that I can do that will really work.
Yeah, that's the beautiful aspect of one of the beautiful aspects of Christianity is that you can actually offer your suffering for someone else's benefit, for someone else's suffering.
Yeah,
It's not without a purpose.
right.
Yeah. Were there moments when faith felt difficult or even distant during this journey?
No, we were really lucky. In fact, I think it drew me in closer. I think it led me to more conscious prayer. I think, that idea of surrender that, my plans don't matter, that you have to be ready for God's plan for you and for your life. You're not in charge. I think all those lessons are always hard, especially when you're in your 20s and you kind of think, okay, world, I'm coming. This is what I'm going to do. And you think that you've written your book ahead of time, whereas, your book is still being written and not by. Yeah.
So, in addition to offering your suffering and also just realizing, all right, I'm not in charge, God is, were there other particular spiritual insights or practices or prayers that sustained you?
Yeah. I mean, we had some of our favorite saints that we asked to pray for us. Saint Jana, Padre Pio. Why can't I think of Jerome? I'm having a real blank on that guy. Sorry, Saint.
It's all good.
Anyway, yeah, I think that was part of it, and that was something that my husband grew up doing, and so he really kind of brought that, asking for the saints' interventions into our lives, and um, because I didn't have a super firm catechesis. I learned a lot as an adult, and so that brought that habit into my life, at least, and then for us as a family, I mean, it's such a big part of what our family does now. I mean, my my youngest, is Giovanni, but we call him DG. He is, like, obsessed with the Saints, obsessed, and, he has all those peg dolls, and he, like, lines them up, and he carries them around in a little tote, and he, like, is constantly asking for another one. Like, right now, he keeps asking for Saint Flower, which is, Saint Therese, Saint Flower, um, and, that's a real gift that I've just sort of noticed, especially with my son and his little peg dolls, that what a gift that was, that that infertility brought to our marriage, that Carter brought up this sort of devotion to saints, and yeah, and then it just became part of our, like, sort of family charism.
Mhm. Would you say that infertility, has been spiritually transformative for you?
I hope that I've, like, used it. I hope that I've, like, carried that cross and used it to help make my soul better for sanctification. Um, it's definitely, I think in general, I feel more grateful for God's gifts, probably. Again, that's very hard to judge it about yourself, but, yeah, I mean, my faith has only grown. It didn't hinder it in any way, so I think yes. I'm gonna say yes.
Wonderful. And we already talked about this, how pre-Cana programs can be better about talking about IVF and the ethical and moral issues with that, and also just about infertility in general. But can you speak a little bit more about how can churches and faith communities better accompany couples experiencing infertility?
Yeah, well, there's a really great infertility ministry called Springs in the Desert, and they have lots and lots of resources, but one of them is they have the tools to help you set up, a infertility support group at your church. They also have virtual things if you don't feel like being sort of public with your immediate community, online prayer groups, podcast, different tools like that, and I think that, promoting that resource, having, like, the pamphlets out, on the table is one good way. I think some of it is just, church life can be very tough when you're dealing with that. I know Mother's Day is something that's often written about by women experiencing infertility, and they often will go to the vigil mass or they'll go to mass in another town, and because it's too much, and I definitely can understand that, but at the same time, I think that it's a lovely I don't think you should they should, not have a special blessing for mothers. I think that's good, but it could be that, you bless you would talk more about, I think, that inherent motherhood in all of us, and that we're all mothers already, and to a certain degree. Although, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's just tough because different personalities would require different things. But I think that if you are creating opportunities for people to find what they need and talk about it more and have maybe, um, I don't know. I mean, I don't like a support group personally. I think but I do think they can really help people. I think having, you know, speakers and events and things like that can also help, but a lot of people don't wanna do that out loud. I do think that it can be a topic. I mean, there's lots of opportunities for it to be touched upon in a homily, just to feel seen and included, it could be good. But I really one of my hopes with writing this book was that priests would use it as a resource, as sort of like one person's real story of being a Catholic woman who experienced infertility. This is what it's like. I have the stories from other women in there too, just to sort of give that perspective. And it's not sort of abstract. This is like a real couple, a real, fleshy story. And, it'd be great if seminarians read it too. That would be my hope.
Mhm. And that would be my hope as well. Let's talk about the hidden grief of infertility. Infertility is often described as a silent or invisible grief. Why do you think that is?
I think because people feel so many negative feelings about it, you feel sad and you feel depressed, which makes you feel vulnerable, which people don't like to feel. Also, it can really bring up some uglier feelings like shame and embarrassment. You just feel again that sort of less than, like, not good enough. You've done something wrong or you're not doing something right. So I think a lot of people don't talk about it. And I think the idea too that and I definitely felt this a lot, like I'm gonna act normal because when I get pregnant, I'll have a baby and I don't have to think about any of this dark stuff again. So it is hard. It's hard to sort of come out, with your story of infertility and your suffering because you feel like a weirdo, you feel like a freak, and I think we just yeah. I mean, again, it's also I mean, not every most people don't talk about their sex lives in person, So I think like out and loud. So I think, and this is just such an intimate part. It's how you think about yourself. It's what you do in your marital bed. It's just so personal and private, and can really bring up some dark and ugly feelings. And I think that's got to be why it's called that.
Mhm. You already mentioned that, when people just throw adoption as the quick band-aid whenever someone brings up infertility. What are some other hurtful or unhelpful things people say to couples struggling with infertility?
Well, here's some few greatest hits. Um, somebody who had like a 2 or 3 year old and then had another baby, and we were there at the baptism, and this was like right when we were in the middle of things. And she just saying, just like holding her baby and looking at her baby, and I'm like, oh, so sweet, so sweet. And she's like, we waited so long. And I'm like, "Oh, was it hard to wait while you had this other kid?" I mean, this it's terrible because it makes you feel terrible, things like that, and not be like, of course she's not saying that, of course she's not being insensitive, she's just enjoying her precious little gift. But, it can when you're already so kinda raw, like sandpapered over yourself, that can hit. Yeah, another one was someone who was, I think, hoping to be pregnant again for a 3rd or 4th time, and she was like, I've really been trying and, charting and everything to make this happen. And, um, it was like 6 or 7 months still, and I couldn't believe I wasn't pregnant. I'm sure that doesn't seem like a long time to you." And I'm like, "Okay." And then also, like, there's another one. I have, I suffered for a long time with, like, really bad periods, and I think we had anyway, I don't even know how that came up because I feel like I don't really talk about my period, although I keep saying period right now, but, I'm not 13 anymore when you talk about it a lot. But somehow it came up in conversation, and someone just said to me, goes, "And all for nothing." And I'm like, "Okay." And I'm not really
Oh.
sure how that was weird, but it was weird. It just, like, called attention to, like, "Oh, and remember you're infertile too. You have bad periods and you're
Mhm.
infertile." So those are things, but again, I don't think people don't really mean that to be bad, but I think it's just, oh, they just say things. These people just don't think before they speak, and we all do that all the time. But, I think when you're again, and then you're carrying around that sort of silent grief, people don't know you're that upset about it. So, they just say things. And then I think, people bring up adoption, like, "Oh, why don't you just adopt?" Or, "Have you tried this test?" Or, "Oh, the stories about other people getting pregnant because they did such and such." Like, that is a lot because then you just be like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh." You know? But again, they're just trying to help. They think, "What can I do? Because this is sad, and I would hate to be that sad, and maybe this story I have will help." Um, yeah, it can be really, really hard to know what to say. It's just tough, like anything, like when someone dies or anything.
Mhm. And on the flip side, what are some of the most meaningful ways people showed support to you, and what kinds of things did they say?
I had a friend who gave me a book of love letters, between St. Jonna and her husband, and she wrote me a very sweet note on, like, little tiny stationery, which I don't remember why I remember that detail so much, but it was so great. It was when I right before I went off to have my surgery in Nebraska. That was wonderful, and I think just offers of prayer, you know, talking about, I think again, it's in my mind, it's so funny because I think about, like, those first years when we were still living in DC, and then there was the Orlando kind of break for 3 years, and then there's a whole new infertility experience when we lived in South Bend and we went to Nebraska, and it didn't work again, and that was just so different because, again, we were a little bit more open to it. We lived in this wonderful Catholic community, and just the support and the understanding other people who had been through it too, and creating those friendships and having like real people to commiserate with and pray for each other. That was just such a different thing. And so having that sort of that support system and that soft place to land was so much better than doing it by myself when we lived in DC.
And how can friends and family respond better?
I always imagine that it must be very hard if you come from a large family and maybe you're the only sister who's having trouble.
Mm.
Um, or maybe, you know, it's like your husband comes from a large family and you wanted to be able to give that for him. This is just obviously assuming this is female factor infertility. So I don't know what you do in those cases. I mean, my family were fine. They were great. again, I didn't keep the sort of them up to date on the ins and outs of everything. They didn't need to understand, like, what all, like, the stickers meant on the charts and things like that. And again, you don't wanna upset people. We're kind of like a stiff upper lip on my side anyway, family. I think too, people keep it private because they don't want that sort of, like, expectation at the end of every 28 days, like
Mhm.
people waiting for news. So I think being relaxed, I think taking the cues from the infertile person is always the best case. And just, just loving them and saying, like, I know you're sad. Like, it's okay to be sad. Like, this is a judgment free zone. And yeah, I think just best practices for everything, but especially for this.
Mhm. What would you say to a couple who received an infertility diagnosis?
Um, I think there's probably something in getting a second opinion now, because there's so many new techniques and advancements since 20 years ago when I saw a doctor. Um, but that, I mean, geez, it's just so hard that I feel like there's not much anybody else can say, um, right at first, because there's so much processing. Again, that recalibration of what life's going to look like for you. That I don't know if there's too much people can say to help in the immediate sense. But again, just sort of, I'm sorry if you ever want to talk about it. I'll pray for you. I think something just nice like baked banana bread or something. I think just like those little like, kindness things are good. And you don't even have to tell them. You don't even have to put them on the spot. You can just start praying for them,
Mhm.
and just sort of see what happens. Or you can say things like, if you ever wanna talk about adoption and infertility, we've been there. You can talk to us, and
Mhm.
those sort of offers. But again, it's so deep, that pain, that it's really hard to know exactly what to do. I mean, I think the more we talk about it and the more we take away that sort of stigma around it, I think people even, sort of have, like, a weird superstition that it could be catching. We don't wanna talk about it. It makes us feel uncomfortable. But I think that if we talk about it more and everybody sort of has like the basic language to talk about it, it'll be easier and people will feel better about reaching out for help and maybe sooner.
Mhm. You mentioned that you and your husband had, have a healthy marriage, and obviously infertility could put a strain on some couples. What are some healthy ways couples can protect their marriage through this experience?
I think even just acknowledging that you should protect your marriage through this experience is like step one, remembering that you are already a family, that infertility is definitely not a vocation. And, going to the doctors, like, that's not, you shouldn't make that your life. And it's very tempting too. I mean, you can get down to really silly things like fabric softener and, different kinds of underpants and, all kinds of things. And you don't want to drive each other crazy. But I think too, I mean, it sounds so trite to say, oh, make sure you still date your husband because, but, that's, I mean, that is true. And the reason why people say it all the time is because keeping the romance alive, I mean, I think reminding yourself that you're allowed to have sex that might not be for baby making, I think that
Mhm.
that's important because I think people get in one mode for a while, and it's hard to sort of break out of that. I think communication, I think, if you're really feeling sad, I mean, I know that, like, when I was really feeling blue, I would try to, like, I really did try to hide it from Carter because I didn't want him to realize how upset I was. And so I remember I used to, try to, like, fix myself up a little bit when he would come home for work. But I mean, it was not, it was like change into a fancy robe rather than my regular scrubby robe. Like, it wasn't good, but that's just an example of like how bad you can start to feel. Um, and so I think that, just keep that communication open. Admit if you need some help, if you need to see a counselor, if you need to talk to a priest together, just, yeah, keep it going. Admit your vulnerability and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Mhm.
Another thing that we did too, which we really liked, was we sponsored a child through Catholic Relief Services, which I think maybe has a different name now. But we would get like little pictures and like a letter from him and Eduardo, Hosa, that was his name. And that really was something that we enjoyed together too. Doing something together that was fun, um, is also a good idea.
And how can couples discern their path forward when facing so many competing voices and options?
Could you tell? Oh, I think prayer is the where place to start. It's probably where you're going to, find your answers. Prayerful discernment. I think talking to people who've done the different choices, whether that's pursuing years or restorative reproductive medicine, whether that's adoption, whether that's choosing to be fruitful in other ways, talking to those couples, seeing what that looks like for you if you really are undecided. But I do think that if you sort of prayerfully discern and give yourself some space and time again to do that recalibration, it will start to become clear like what you're going to do. I mean, I think a lot of people actually do know. You start to, as the months tick off, you sort of develop a plan B. And so I think that you're not often anyway. I mean, unless it's like something that's like you are 100%, not going to be pregnant. This is a permanent situation. Um, I think that people are rarely blindsided completely just because of the length of time it takes to get those diagnostics.
Hmm. Now let's turn to adoption to talk a little bit more in depth. And as we already talked about, how many people will frame adoption as the quote unquote solution to infertility. And obviously, you and your husband discerned it and really talk about it as a vocation. Can you speak a little bit more about what it means to have a vocation to adoption and how that became evident for you?
There were little signs. I mean, the fact that it was so easy for us to say that even though we're still going to seek out care with another doctor, let's just get the process going. I think that was a sign that it was a vocation for us. Another was actually when we were taking a break from the infertility treatments during the London semester, two different people called because they knew of two different situations where a woman was in a crisis pregnancy and considering placing her child for adoption. And so they called us to see if we would be open to it. And we didn't even flinch. We just immediately said yes, which was fun. And they would have been born, actually, if both situations had worked out. Neither did. But if it had, it would have been almost like twins because they would have been born very close together. And then, of course, like the next year, we actually did adopt twins, which was sort of strange. But that was another feeling I think that actually helped us be able to say, like, we're done with the needles. We're just done with this. This is what we're meant to do. This isn't, this is good for us. So I do think the fact that for us emotionally and psychologically, it was never weren't really any hurdles to it. That we didn't have any hesitation. That I think was the biggest sign that it was a real vocation for us.
Mhm. And we've already discussed how when couples experience infertility, people often quickly say, "Why don't you just adopt?" Why can that question sometimes miss the complexity of the situation?
I think because depending on the kind of adoptions you choose, it could be. I mean, it can be something as straightforward as money. I mean, private adoption can cost my microphone. It can cost up to $50,000 in some cases. I think with foster care, I think because the object is often reunification, that you could risk um, that sort of loss. Especially after you've been wanting a baby for so long, and you maybe mother a baby for years, and then it's adopted by or just reunified with their biological parents. And some people don't want to take that risk. Another thing is people often are very, very tied to their own genetic makeup. And I think, especially if you come from like a family who celebrates that and, has this is a certain culture based on sort of like where your family, came from, your origins. I think also people, and we definitely regretted, like, we just sort of wanted to see what we made together, like who we would make together. But actually, Carter pointed out, he's like, this is who we make together. These are our children. But I think people are interested in, they really hold bloodlines, things like that, in very high value. Again, we didn't, so that wasn't a big deal for us. But it really is important to some people. And I also think that people don't want to, I mean, there's just so many complicated feelings with adoption when you have experienced infertility. And I think a lot of women really, really grieve not ever being pregnant. And so to jump right to that, or I think I think one of the reasons why, even though I feel always such a hypocrite because I do not want to conflate the two, adoption and infertility. I end up talking about them both only it's because it's not the same as choosing, I don't know, red or green. It can be done at the same time, and I think people don't realize that. I think people think they have to stop trying to become pregnant before they adopt, and they don't want to stop trying yet. And so I think that people know. So that's one of the reasons I talk about it so much, because I think that people need to know that if you're open to both, you can do both. One doesn't eliminate the other. So again, if people do think that they'd have to stop trying, they think, why is this person like discounting me? Like they think I never can get pregnant. Like they think they're saying like you should just go ahead and quit. So yeah, I mean, I just think too. I think again, we don't like when people are just normally like fertile and they get pregnant. We don't we don't like ask personal questions about like what they did to get pregnant. I think, so I think these questions really sort of insert yourself into a very, very personal topic. So I think that's why that kind of question grates for a lot of women.
And I think it's a good point to make that it's not either or. A couple who's trying to navigate infertility can still continue down that path and
Yeah.
also put an application for adoption. And
Uh-huh.
as you and I both know, there are stories of people who did that and then ended up adopting and then getting pregnant as well,
Uh-huh.
or and you never know. But I think that there's a level of generosity that if the couple discern that together, and the desire for their hearts, the way that you and your husband had, that God fulfills that and gives you children. So I think that's beautiful. But again, it is a vocation, and not everybody who is infertile is called to be an adoptive parent either. But it's the same with, for example, as you mentioned, foster care. Some people might be called to be foster parents, but not adoptive parents, or vice
Mhm.
versa. And so
Right.
each of those paths has its own discernment process and its own vocation. And I think
Yeah.
that's what the couple has to discern together. What are we being called to,
Yeah.
together?
And I think also people can sometimes suggest adoption and then tell a story about the person they know who adopted and then got pregnant, as if like, I know how you can solve infertility. Go out and get a kid. Then you'll get pregnant, and that's your happy ending. And so I think that can rub people the wrong way,
Right.
rightly so. Sort of just thinking about just adoption as a means to,
Mhm.
I don't know. Seems like witchcraft, but anyway,
Right. And adoption has
yeah,
to be on its own value, that
yeah,
adoption
and that's still
becomes
your kid. They weren't just like there for
right,
like
right.
or like another one is just you guys should just relax. It's like, okay, why don't you relax? Let me lend you my fist.
Um, how did adoption shape your understanding of motherhood and family?
um, that's a good question. I don't, again, I don't know. I mean, I grew up with divorced parents, an only child, um, close with my mother, but it was a different thing. I think when you get to see I mean, I just think, I don't know if it was particularly adoption. I think it was just being a mother, helped me understand, um, my relationship with my own mother, which I think has gotten even better since becoming a mother myself. Um, and I think it's really important for your like your kids to see you parent their siblings. I think that's kind of interesting. And when you get that feedback from how you're parenting the siblings is a different idea of motherhood. What the especially now, I mean, I have a 21-year-old, two 15-year-olds, and a almost 4-year-old. And parenting at these three different stages is just so different. And again, it's a different situation the entire time. We went from 1 to 3 with one adoption, and then 11 years, and then a baby. For me, it's almost like, I mean, it's just so incredible because I never welcomed any other siblings, and I think it's more affected my idea of family than anything else. But I also think, and even though it's masculine to think, that um, Jesus was Joseph's son by adoption, and the line of David flows through Jesus because of adoption. That idea that adoption is emulating the Holy Family at all is something that's pretty special that has shaped my understanding. And realize that, that this is like a completely legitimate form of actual parenthood, not adoptive parenthood, not this person has been grafted onto our family tree and is our family in every sense of the word. So that too, and I think I didn't realize that there was any difference. Again, because I hadn't grown up around people who had experienced adoption or didn't have any adoptions in my family. But I think those are my thoughts on that.
Hmm. Do you think couples need time to grieve infertility before they can authentically pursue adoption?
No, I mean, I grieved it for years. I mean, even still now, I feel like, especially now with perimenopause and knowing that sort of all of that's going to be in the past, within the next decade, hopefully, I really at this point. The grief, it changes. I mean, like, and later in life, it's sort of like, I mean, I imagine a lot of women as their bodies change and you get older and it's clear that your body's not built for, making babies anymore, that, um, I'm sure there's a grief that every woman experiences, even if they have 8 children, I mean, maybe there's some relief for some people, I can imagine, but the, um, the idea that it's different, that part of your life, that you sort of look forward to as a young girl, and then, you have this time when you're like a woman, and then it's like, "What am I now?" And so, for me, it's almost double because it's grieving that part of my life, and then also for, like, the fertility I never had, which is strange because there's no I think you hear some people with large families, especially saying then and then we just never had any more kids, and there was sort of like this natural sort of cutoff and it's anyway, so there's that. I'm still kind of working on that one. But again, like I was still like we said just a couple minutes ago that maybe it's because I wasn't I still felt like we were going to find the answer when we first adopted. Um but I think I was ready to go again and I mean really, I even had I think I talk about this in the book, a positive pregnancy test in my late 40s. Um, and I think it turned out just to be like a blip. But I went out and bought a pregnancy test. So there was still something there. I don't yeah, 'cause the grief I don't think is ever gonna go away. You're all maybe for some people, God bless them, but I think because it changes and again, like so now I'm thinking about like I won't have as many grandchildren as my friends who have these big families or just things like that. So no, I don't think you have to, especially if you're open to it. And I think you have to realize that it's another way, it's a different way, but it's not a second best.
Hmm. And how has adoption deepened your understanding of human dignity and belonging?
Hmm. Again, I just think my kids are my kids. I don't think it any differently than any other parent with a biological child. I think that you have this little soul entrusted to you and you need to do everything you need to do to them. And I don't think there it can be complicated with of course families of origin and things like that, but I think in terms of just the relationship I have with my children, it's the same as any other parent.
Hmm. For couples listening who are facing infertility and wondering about adoption, what wisdom would you offer them?
That I've never once thought this isn't as good as my, biological children would have been or something. I think people want children oftentimes that look like them, and I'm telling you, they will look like you. The same expressions, my 4 sons, they all look like each other. Baby pictures that pop up in my, like, Facebook memories, I have to, like, look hard at the date to figure out which one it is sometimes. And even I've seen it happen in families where the adopted child is a different race than their other children. They just, they mimic you. They do this. And also, I think this is a pretty practical thing. You can nurse an adopted baby, which is really, if you're into that, it's really great. And breastfeeding consultants love it. They get so excited. It's like the thing they've like the myth they've heard about. And when they meet someone who like wants to do it, they really want to help you do it. And it really is nice to have your body cooperate with you after you've felt betrayed by it for so long. And I think that's something that people should do if they want to, again, because obviously, just feed that baby. Fed is best.
Our culture often treats children as something we produce or acquire, as we discussed earlier. Does adoption remind us that children are gifts rather than products?
I was actually having this conversation with someone else the other day. I think it can because, I certainly feel that way and was reminded each time we were chosen to parent a child. But I think also, there are people, there's a certain sense in which it overlaps with some of the terrible surrogacy stories you hear where a baby's born and people don't intended parents opt out for whatever reason because especially in any placement. Obviously you have to consider what your family is willing to take on, but sometimes it's very very small details of circumstances around conception or some different biological things that aren't diseases that people can say like, no, that's not for me. I'll wait until I get, what I think of as like the perfect baby. So that's definitely a possibility in adoption, which seems crazy to me. We're definitely an all comers, welcome sort of family. Um, but so I think that's part of it. But again, I don't think I realized that connection until maybe, maybe the last 10 years. Certainly, I didn't do anything to bring these babies into, creation, and I get to call them my own. So that, I don't think there's a bigger gift than that.
Mhm. If someone listening feels like infertility has robbed them of the life they hoped for, what would you want them to know?
I think it'll take time, but when you realize that everyone carries a cross for something, I think that I've known families who the husband and wife just sort of like whisper or wink at each other across the room and they're pregnant again. And while they also view children as a gift, sometimes it can cause a really, really heavy burden on the woman's body, financially. Maybe they don't just have room for another bed in the house, things like this. And that, I think, it is hard, especially I point out that example because I think that's sort of the hardest one to be sympathetic toward when you want to be pregnant so badly. The fact that anyone would be like, "Oh no, I'm pregnant again," even like in a good Catholic family, seems crazy. But I think that you just have to realize that everyone has something. People search for a spouse, and sometimes they never find them. But that doesn't mean that their life's not worth living or that they won't bear significant and good and holy fruits. Um, or you marry the wrong person, or, there are lots of ways our lives don't turn out like we hoped. This is a big one. This one seemed guaranteed, when we entered into our marriages. Um, but it really isn't. And when you give over, well, he already has the reins, but when you will willingly accept that idea, I think that you just have to be really open and you have to co-create with God that life that, he's giving to you. And, I just the giving up of control. It's really, really hard. And it took me a long time to get there. I'm not sure I'm quite there yet. But with this one, you know, yes, you're going to have to recalibrate. Yes, it's not going to be exactly the way you imagined. But really, even if you were able to conceive easily and you gave birth to children, something else would have caused your life not to look like something else, like the way you hoped. Um, Again, that doesn't help in the moment. So many of these things are exactly what you don't want to hear in the moment. In fact, I think about my book too. Like, I know I was thinking about writing it for myself when I was younger, but I know that some of these things that I say in the book, I wouldn't have wanted to hear then, because when you're really in the thick of it, it's really hard to hear anybody else. Um, so, I think the best thing we can do is just pray for people that are suffering, and then see what they need because it's it I mean, it's really devastating. I tried I'm a happy person. I love my life. Um, which sometimes I want that to be an example for people, but at the same time, I don't want to gloss over the fact that it's really hard.
Mhm. Well, I think that that's your book and is a really beautiful witness, and I think it's probably easier for people to hear it from someone who's already been there as opposed to someone who doesn't have any idea what it's like to be in your shoes, and I
Yeah.
think that's a super helpful resource for people. Looking back now, what has infertility taught you about love, vocation, and the meaning of a fruitful life?
Oh, that big one, that you're just not in charge, that like love begets love, that one of the greatest gifts in the world is having a loving spouse that, really together, as long as you stay together, you can really deal with very, very hard things. It's a real boost to realize, that you've got through that and you are flourishing, and I think that the fact that you can just that love just comes. It's natural to us. It's natural for us to want to love and care, and all you have to do is be open to it, and it might not look the way you wanted to, but, I think that, God knows best.
That's right. If you could change one thing about how our culture understands infertility, what would it be?
I think back to what we talked about earlier, that we need to start speaking truthfully about it so that everyone understands that, and they don't feel hoodwinked by the promises that they have all the time in the world. I think that's one thing. I think people need to understand that, you know, 10 to 20% of people will experience infertility. So it's not particularly that uncommon, that it's private, but that we need deeper understanding. We need, I think, more charity towards people. I think we don't need people trying to solve the problem, but we do need, I think, more access to more awareness and more medical help through, I think insurance needs to handle it better and not, and companies need to handle it better in order to support, especially using reproductive or restorative reproductive medicine rather than the technologies or the promise of egg freezing. I think that I think at this point in time, I think people are speaking up about it. People are writing about it. I think you can, you know, either know somebody or know somebody who knows somebody who's been suffering from this. And I think just acknowledging that and not making it such a she's infertile. I think it's
Mhm.
just to treat it just like, actually still a human being, and it's, this is just a normal thing. Some people are infertile, and it shouldn't have to be some kind of scary secret thing.
Mhm. Well, Lee, thank you so much for this very real and just very fruitful conversation about how to be fruitful even in the face of infertility. And I believe that your and Carter's life is very fruitful in all the ways that you discussed. And I hope that your fireplace mantle will be teeming with all the stockings from all the grandchildren, and that is my hope for you and my prayer for you. And
Oh, thanks, Arena. Yeah, I'm pretty chuffed it's at the 6. I never thought I'd have 6 up there, so that's pretty I'm still pretty excited about that, but yes, I can't wait for that to multiply.
well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Great, thank you.
From my conversation with Leigh Snead, author of Infertile but Fruitful, fellow with the Catholic Association, and co host of the nationally syndicated show Conversations with Consequences, here are my 5 key takeaways on infertility and fruitfulness. 1. Infertility is not just a medical problem, it's an existential and relational trial. Modern culture tends to frame infertility as a technical problem waiting for a technological solution. But for many couples, infertility is a profound personal trial that affects identity, marriage, expectations about the future, and one's sense of femininity or masculinity. 2. The fertility industry often presents IVF as the obvious solution. Couples facing infertility frequently experience strong pressure from physicians and society to pursue IVF. Yet many are not fully informed about the ethical dilemmas, emotional consequences, and difficult decisions involved, especially what happens to unused embryos. 3. Adoption is not a quote unquote cure for infertility. Adoption and infertility are often conflated, but they are fundamentally different. Infertility is a medical diagnosis, while adoption is a distinct vocation. Not every infertile couple is called to adopt, and suggesting adoption as a quick fix can overlook the complexity and grief involved with experiencing infertility. 4. Human fruitfulness is bigger than biological parenthood. Fruitfulness is not limited to having biological children. People can bear fruit through relationships, mentorship, service, prayer, and spiritual motherhood or fatherhood. A meaningful life is not dependent on fertility. 5. We should accept suffering and our limitations as part of the human condition. Modern culture often assumes that suffering should be solved by technology. But infertility reminds us of the limits of technology and that some forms of suffering cannot actually be fixed. Instead, they can become sources of spiritual growth, compassion, and deeper love. Because truth matters and human dignity isn't optional. This is Bioethics Babe. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Bioethics Babe podcast. If you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and your favorite podcast platform, and share with your friends and family. Also check out bioethicsbabe.com for the latest episodes and resources.